I, of course, look at everything through a neuroscience lens, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of get into creativity really emerging out of almost like a flow state, kind of out of an integrated brain balance state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about that with around courage and vulnerability, right, it is so both individual specific and relationship specific, right? So there's all of a sudden like there are layers, right? Some of those Zen diagrams, all of a sudden there's like all of these, circles
Yeah.
around. The standard definition of courage is that sort of Lone Ranger courage, right? You can do this, you can do that, you can, whatever. Obviously, in RCT, we really talk about more about relational courage, right? That arises out of conquering or, overcoming something in an individual way, that may be valuable to an individual, but sort of the idea of courage, relational courage, being able to move actually even a collective forward, right, means
Mm-hmm.
sinking into the vulnerability, being able to, not only tolerate the vulnerability, but value it. And, almost know as you're sinking into it, right, that it's happening. And what do I mean by that? I mean, as you're getting more vulnerable, a lot of people kind of go offline, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
as they get more vulnerable, their cognitive goes offline because it ends up getting scary, and whatever their window of tolerance around, scary or sympathetic nervous system, right? That everybody's is slightly different. And we know that that can expand in connection, right? I mean, we can be much more vulnerable if we feel safe in relationship than we can outside of it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
almost like watching this stutter step down, getting the courage to be able to sink a little further,
Oh,
getting the
yeah.
courage to sink a little further, but always having the ability to, I don't want to say that it's even conscious or cognitive, like planned, or, but there's got to be that balance, because if you get into vulnerability where your brain really goes into fear, right, a fear state, or overwhelming sympathetic nervous system, then you disconnect, right? Because
Right.
that's what
Yeah.
our sympathetic nervous system tells us to do, is to protect yourself, right? And so everybody has kind of whatever their sweet spot is along that axis, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the courage is sort of, can you go deeper? Can you go deeper, but stay integrated? And when you're doing that relationally in context with somebody else, I think there is an opening and an access to even creativity, access to more of you, right?
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Right.
when you talk about kind of a suffering artist, or a, kind of the places that people go to find creativity, right? It's often in the, I want to say, the outskirts of yourself,
Mhm.
you know.
Oh, yeah.
And even as I'm saying it with you, I'm sort of trying to check who are the truly creative people I think about, and is that true
Mhm.
what I'm saying, or is that just, am I just making it up, So that's a starting place.
Yeah. That just made me think of Hannah Gadsby's Van Gogh, because that's how she says it. But I've never said it that way before. But his brother, like at the very end, when she sort of drops that his brother bomb in there, that idea of what he had was his brother
Yeah. Yeah.
was really powerful for me. Like that just,
Yes. 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 No, I get that. Kind of the difference for me between writing like my last book versus this book that I wrote, right?
mm-hmm.
So, and
Oh, yeah.
there's so much of it arose not so much about my relationship with Isaac, that had a whole thing unto itself, but it's very much my relationship with my sister that allowed
Mm-hmm.
all of this to unfold
Yeah.
and continue to unfold, and kind of really being able to identify in me how crucial that is to staying open to this process, right?
Mm-hmm.
To both the healing process with Isaac, but also everything that's coming about from it, right?
Yes.
So there's creativity in terms of writing, but there's also, we're planning, a group of us are planning a big reconciliation conference in New Orleans in
Wow.
June, you
Oh,
know,
that's amazing. Yeah.
so sort of, and I know how important having Nancy there, right? So each step of the way, we're going, we have a book fair coming up, the Tulane Book Festival in a couple of weeks, and Nancy's flying in on Friday for Isaac and my panel talk, and it's just like how important all of that has been to hold the level of vulnerability, right? Hold the level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I'm going to, in order to keep telling the story, in order to, pull out, cull, if you will, the points that need to be made, the learning that can happen, the, expanding connection, basically.
I feel like I got to know your sister reading the book. When you talk about it, I picture the scene in an office, and it felt like she just sort of opened up the emotional door that had to open. Yeah. Maybe I'm adding my own stuff to it, but that seems to be what I remember from that.
So she couldn't help but go there emotionally, right? Because it was so powerful. So it wasn't like she opened it. I mean, it was, we both were pried open. I think because of the trauma, we were both protective of ourselves, even in that space. I don't think she could have even felt that if I wasn't there, and vice versa. And likewise, I think with Isaac, he was there with his wife, right? It wasn't like Isaac and I just met face to face. It was like he needed his wife there to be able to tolerate the vulnerability, and I needed Nancy, and vice versa. You know what I mean? And there was a collective sinking into the real horror and pain of the story, quite literally, and being able to hear his story and then be able to share some of ours. I'm not sure Nancy and I went down there thinking that we would share a whole lot of our stuff. Like it was so compelling what he had been through, You
each had already an established and deep connection that allowed you to be vulnerable.
Right.
And then, like you were describing the steps, like to go deeper, to know that you're safe.
Yes.
To go deeper, to know that you're safe. It seems pretty natural that the deeper you go, the more you could create.
Well, right. The more you could access, unless you get to that place where you're too deep, right? And
right.
And I think that's something that's really important to sort of think about for anyone. What is too deep, and to be okay with knowing what's too deep. It doesn't mean that you don't strive to be able to get more vulnerable or whatever, but to really kind of begin to tune in. I mean, I think that's the part of the power of kind of looking through this lens, right? Like it's not like saying, okay, come on, open up,
just do it.
Just do it, particularly around, different traumas, that at a certain level you can't, and you might want to, but you can't.
Right. So there's also a courage in being able to say, this is how far I can go right now.
Right. I'm always worried that people thinking this is almost prescriptive, follow these steps and keep having the courage to get more and more vulnerable, then this is going to emerge, and getting used to and getting comfortable with, right? But you could go down through a couple of layers of vulnerability and even miss all that's connected to it.
It's having the courage to be vulnerable, and also to look around, like to experience it and to connect while, like, it's I just keep picturing, swirly things all connecting because they all go together.
And to imagine both of those threads as being so crucial, right? The relationship is the container that the courage and the vulnerability is in. And
the relationship is the container. I like that.
Yeah.